Okay.
All right, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to Somerville Church of Christ on this very rainy morning. Hopefully you didn't have to swim here, or if you did, you remembered your floaties. I didn't know I knew it was going to rain some this weekend. I didn't know it was going to rain this much. But I'm glad you're able to make it this morning. I'm going to let you in. My name's Zach Daly. Thank you for coming to class this morning. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I was not supposed to be teaching this morning. If you remember, we're doing a class on evangelism and different perspectives that people have on evangelism, different aspects of your life where you can apply evangelism. And as part of that, we've been having guest speakers, some really awesome guest speakers come in. And we had a really awesome guest speaker for this week, but our guest speaker had something come up. So we had to rearrange the schedule a little bit. So I had to step in, which normally wouldn't be a problem, but I was actually in Mississippi last week visiting family. So I had to put something together quickly. And I didn't necessarily have something in particular on my mind to talk about. So this class is going to be a little bit of a sneak peek for you for a class that we're going to be offering in the spring. Okay? In the spring, we're going to be offering a class where we're going to talk about evangelism and what exactly evangelism looks like when we're talking to people. Okay? So as we've been talking about evangelism through this quarter, we've been looking at different perspectives, different aspects of our lives that people use evangelism in. And one of the things that we've kind of touched on a few times is that talking about our faith or evangelizing, it can be kind of hard, can't it? You know, it's a very revealing thing to do, to go to somebody and to share your faith with them. Because faith, what you believe, is one of the most important, if not the most important thing about you, right? It's a very personal thing that you're sharing with somebody. And being vulnerable with people in that way, it comes with risks. Sometimes it doesn't go like we want it to. And so because we don't necessarily enjoy being vulnerable, putting ourselves out there, taking that risk, a lot of times we come up with excuses for not doing it. Sometimes those excuses are valid, sometimes they're not. But what are some of the excuses maybe that you've heard us mention through this class or that you've made for yourself as to why you don't go share your faith with somebody? What are some of the things that run through your head when you're like, well, I could go talk to that person, but I'm not going to because of X, Y, or Z? What are those reasons?
I don't know enough.
I don't know enough. What else?
What if I say the wrong thing?
You know, what if I say the wrong thing?
I need to ease them into it.
Ease them into it. What do you mean by that?
It's an excuse.
That's just an excuse. Maybe not a valid excuse. Huh? What else? I don't know enough. I don't know what I'm going to say. I need to ease them into it.
I'm scared of rejection.
Scared of rejection. That's a big one. Because sometimes that happens, and it's not fun to be rejected. What else? What are some other excuses that we might have for not sharing? What about I'm too busy? I don't have enough time. Maybe I think the other person isn't interested. Sometimes it's not appropriate, right? That can be a valid excuse. Sometimes it's not an appropriate time. But sometimes we use that as an excuse when we just don't want to do it, right? Don't want to ruin the relationship. Maybe we're worried that they're not going to take it badly and they're not going to want to associate with us anymore, right? One of the ones that y'all, sorry, did I hear somebody else?
You want them alphabetically, or we got about 1,000 of them?
Yeah. We come up with all sorts of them. Yes, ma'am.
One I have encountered long ago is, why is your religion that way? What's wrong? I go to church. I am a Christian.
Yeah. Sometimes we're worried about what they're going to say in response to us, right? And worry that we may not have the right answer for them. And that one, along with the, we don't know what we're going to say, That's one that I hear often, one that I struggle with sometimes, I'm worried that I'm not going to say the right thing, that I'm going to trip over my words, or that I may not get what I'm trying to say across clearly and I may confuse them, right? We think that if we don't have all the answers, it may just be better not to say anything at all sometimes. Or if we can't say it smoothly and confidently, then we just shouldn't say anything. And there's, like Brenda said, there's a little bit of a fear of the unknown there too, right? We don't know what they're going to say in response to us. What if they say something and we don't know the answer? We may have our talking points, we may have our script that we can follow, but at some point they're going to say something back to you. And at that point you can throw your script out the window, right? You don't know what they're going to say. So there's an element of the unknown there that we have to contend with. And the only way to get better at this sort of thing is to practice, right? But practicing this can be hard because it feels very high stakes when you talk to a friend or you talk to a stranger about your faith. It's not something that you necessarily feel like it's okay to mess up at, to get better, right? It's something where you feel like you need to do it right the first time. So what I want to do and what we're going to do in the spring, we're going to offer a class where we're going to practice talking about evangelism. We're going to have some topics, some questions that you might hear. We're going to talk about it a little bit. And then we're going to break up into groups, and we're going to sit and we're going to role play a little bit. And we're going to talk. And we're going to actually use our words to communicate what we believe. And hopefully that practice in a safe space with people that we trust and know, that will help prepare us for when it's time to do it for real out in the world. Okay? So today, like I said, this is kind of a little bit of a preview of it. We're going to look at a few questions, common questions that I think you will run into when you're sharing your faith with people. And we're going to talk about some responses that you could give, maybe some not so good responses you could give, and some questions that you could ask them in return to keep the conversation going. Okay? Do you have any questions about what we're doing this morning? Everybody on the same page? All right, we'll jump right into it then. First question, what do you believe? It's a very basic question, but it's an important one, right? What do you believe? What are some things that pop into your head just off the bat? If somebody asked you, what do you believe? What would be some of the things that you might say in response?
That there is a God.
Okay. Believe there is a God.
I believe in Jesus and His resurrection.
Mm-hmm. So this question is kind of can be a tricky one if somebody just asked you off the bat because it's so broad, right? There's a lot of different ways that you could take this question. There's 2,000 years of Christian theology about what we Christians believe. And there's countless books, countless arguments over it. So how do you boil that down into something short and sweet? Well, first you have to know what you believe. So do you actually know what you believe? Can you sit there and think in your head of a short 2 to 3 sentence encapsulation of what you believe as a Christian? That can be harder to do than it sounds, right? Does anybody want to give it a shot? Any brave souls out there want to give it a shot? Yes, sir.
I believe in the inspired Word of God.
Okay.
And it is inerrant. And they'll come back and get you on that one because they can think of some things that the Bible says that they don't believe in, like especially with creation. That's a big comeback, but that's what I believe completely, and I have taught classes on that, and it's irrefutable in my mind.
Right. So starting with the Bible, I know that's what Dennis likes to do, I believe, starting with the Bible. Anybody else want to give it a shot?
I mean, say something along the lines of, I believe God created the universe and everything in it, and He wants to have a relationship with me, and that's the thing in my life that gives me strength, gives me joy, peace, helps me get through a lot of difficult, things that I've been through. Like, I'm not sure how people get by without it, if we're just sticking to a couple sentences.
Yeah. And we want to keep it short, right? Because we don't know, that you may have a relationship with this person and that, you have to adjust all of this accordingly to the person that you're talking to. But you don't know what level of experience they may have with the Bible or Christianity. They probably don't want to get into a real long discussion. So you just want to give it something short, to the point, but it gets to the heart of what you believe. And that, as I was sitting there, I have my statement I'll share with you in a minute. But I was sitting there trying to think of 2 or 3 sentences. A lot of times in church, especially if you've been raised in the church like I was, a lot of times it's just all kind of taken for granted, right? Like you just kind of been raised in this. It's kind of all just kind of baked into what you believe or what you think about the world. And so when you're trying to put yourself in somebody else's shoes who may not have heard it before, you have to really make sure that you're getting the heart of it, right? So my statement was, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. He came to earth as a human, lived a perfect life, and died for me so that I could have a relationship with him. So that was my statement. And I don't think there's any right or wrong statements. It's what you believe and what you feel comfortable talking about. What are some things that you may not want to say in this situation? Alyssa?
I think it's important to be, I don't want to say a little generic, but we often, to our detriment, know more about what we believe about like hot button issues than we know or are willing to communicate about the gospel itself. And sometimes if we are going to say what we believe, when we gravitate to those hot button issues, that is more likely to provoke an argument than to outline what we actually believe. So I think keeping it focused on Jesus, focused on the God is really critical here. I think it's also important in our context to assume that this isn't the first person, that you are not the first person who is saying something about religion, about Christianity to this person. That might happen upon occasion, but in my experience, every person I've ever talked to about faith has some experience so far, and so being aware of that I think is really helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, you don't necessarily want to get sidetracked, right? Dennis?
When I study with someone, generally speaking, we both believe, and I use John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but Jesus. That's one word. And I put myself out there. Let's study. We don't agree with each other. Let's see what the Bible says. And if what I'm doing is wrong, I'll change. And I mean that. Because I have confidence in what I believe. But if I believe something that's not biblical, I want to know it. And I think that helps. And I never tell anybody, I shouldn't say never, most 99 and 9/10, I don't tell them, you're lost. I don't do that. I just sit down and study why I can believe the Bible. And that I need to follow Jesus, and let's do what that says. And ask me any question you want. And I'll work to give you a Bible answer. You do the same. Most people don't have a knowledge of where Genesis is. And they want to know, but they've never really studied. They've just had what they believe spoon-fed to them.
Well, they've just absorbed it.
From whatever they were raised.
Yeah.
But I think it's important when we go into a study. I'm studying with you, Zach. If I'm wrong, Zach, you show it to me, and I'll change. How about you? Let's do what's right. We want to go that one way, and that's Jesus Christ, so we can go to heaven. That's just
Thank you, Dennis. Lynn?
In my experience, you're almost never gonna get any question this broad necessarily, because there's gonna be something they wanna know what you believe about blank,
Yeah.
most likely. But in this scenario, what I would encourage everyone to do is also, if you just say, well, here's the facts, okay, that's great. What does it mean? Why aren't we talking about that? Hey, by the way, Jesus died for me because God loved me so much, and now I get to go to heaven and I get to live a life for God. You won't believe the difference that's made in my life since I've learned that. The grace and forgiveness that I feel on a daily basis because of Jesus Christ is amazing. Like, why aren't we talking about how the impact it has on us? Why would I just give facts, right? Here's what I believe, and here's the impact it's made on me. That's going to have a much, to me, more impact than, oh, well, let me go through the facts of what I believe.
Yeah.
What does it mean to me?
Absolutely. It gets into the personal testimony part a little bit, and that's very important because relationships is how you're going to bring people to Christ. And so in our class in the spring, we're going to work on our personal testimony a good bit, making sure we know what our story is about our faith. So thank you, Lynn. So what not to do, I put don't get sidetracked. There's kind of along the same lines as Alyssa. There's things that we think are important, and they are important. But when you're talking to somebody who is maybe new to Christianity or just starting to think about it, is it the most important thing to talk about? So, do you really want to get into instrumental music? Probably not. Do you really want to start saying, well, the Catholics believe this, but Church of Christ believes this? And probably not, right? Those sorts of things, I'm not saying they're not important, but they're for farther down the road, right? And then, follow-up question. What sort of follow-up question would you ask this person after you answered their question to try to keep the conversation going?
This was a good question.
Yeah. The easy thing to ask them is, what do you believe, right? I told you what I believe, what do you believe? And from there you can start to identify areas of commonality, areas of difference, and discuss from there. So what do you believe? What do you know about Jesus?
Zach, kind of to Lynn's point, a lot of times I think this, when I encounter this, it's what do you believe about?
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with, or it's more like, how do you deal with this issue? What do you think about this? Where do you, I've had situations like that, and it just, you're stepping in where they are, which is where you need to meet them, where they're open and listening kind of thing. And so, but we need to think about why we believe almost everything that we believe and think about and have opinions on. I mean, not which toothpaste you like and things like that. But if we're going to be prepared to have these conversations, are we basing what we believe, our opinions and our positions on how we understand our relationship with God and how He wants us to live? Or is it just based on like the news channel that we watch and the people in our feed, on our social media feed? Are we really thinking about all of this stuff? Because if people are in the important things in life, I get questions about child raising from people sometimes. How do you deal with this with your kids or whatever? And that goes, I go back to, then it opens the door to me. Well, and I end up getting the scripture on that because they're like, man, everything changes so fast. I'm like, I think you gotta believe in a core that doesn't change. For us, for my family, that's the Bible, and the principles in there never change, and so when this new stuff comes up, that's how we look at it, through this lens, but if we're not thinking about that, then we're gonna be totally unprepared. And they don't need book, chapter, and verse quoted to them when you start these conversations usually. They're just happening in life. Mm-hmm. And are we prepared to explain what we built our life on and how we direct it and how we make decisions and things like that. So we should think about that. And if you think about it a lot, then when it comes up, you will have you're like, well, I don't have all the answers, but I'll tell you what I do,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, and to Scott's point, you have to be thinking about what you actually believe and why you believe it, right? Or else you're gonna meet, because you will meet people who don't believe it, who have questions. And if you're not convinced as to why you believe it, when they ask you those questions, you're not gonna have an answer for them, right? All right, next question. How did you become a Christian? Or why did you become a Christian? First, and this really goes for all of them, right? It helps to know who you're talking to, know their situation, know their background. But how would you respond to this? What pops into your head? Somebody asks you, why are you a Christian, or how did you become a Christian?
What, I mean, for me, I say, you know, look, I grew up in a Christian household. This is what I've been taught my whole life. But I had to decide as an adult whether I was gonna keep doing this. Because I don't think that resonates too well, you know, whatever. I'm like, well, I was 12, and, you know, they're like, well, I'm 40. I don't know if I can relate to why a 12-year-old did something, you know? So it's just kind of like, well, but I had to remake that decision as an adult, essentially, or not remake, but like confirm that I'm gonna live my life this way. You know, essentially, like, why do I follow it still? Why am I a committed Christian this many years later? You know, kind of thing. Because again, for me, I always felt like it was a non-compelling story. It's compelling to parents raising their kids up in the church, maybe, but for me to talk about when I was 12 years old, why I did something, which I can, I think then I kind of go to like, and why I still am, and why I remain faithful, and why this, you know, so.
Yeah. What else? How did you become a Christian, or why did you become a Christian? What do you think they're looking for when they ask you this? I think they're looking for a connection, right? I think they're looking for your personal story, right? I think this is an instance where they're not necessarily wanting to hear arguments, apologetics type of thing. And depending on the person, maybe they are, but I tend to agree with what Lynn was saying earlier, that in this instance, they are wanting to hear from you, the person. Like, why have you made this decision? How has it changed your life? So then the question for us is, can we tell that story? Alyssa?
I think under this question is often, at least in my experience, granted, I work at a religious university, the question is asked more in the context of why did you stay a Christian as opposed to how did you become. And I think for those of us who grew up in the church, that is a helpful way to think about how do I tell my story, right? Because again, right, I was a child, literally a kid who grew up, you know, I'm a preacher's kid, lots of us around here. That story is not that compelling. But the story of why you stay a Christian, especially knowing your audience, and if that is the question they're asking, can be really helpful.
Yeah. Why did you become, like Scott said, those of us that were raised in the church, you know, it may not be a dramatic story necessarily. It doesn't have to be dramatic. You know, I remember hearing stories when I was a younger person about the guy who was living a life of sin and drugs and all that stuff, and you know, was headed downhill, and he found Christ and renewed his life, and now he's doing great. It's like, man, that's a great story. And my story is I went to church ever since I was a kid and stayed in church, right? It's like my story's lame compared to that dude's. But it doesn't have to be dramatic, but it has to be real, right? All of us have a real story. It has to be authentic. And like Scott and Alyssa have said, the story of why you stayed a Christian, why you chose to keep going that path when you became older, you know, that's a compelling story as well. But you have to be able to tell it, right? Have you actually sat and thought, like, what is my story? That's something that we're going to work on in our class in the springtime.
Exactly.
Lynn?
One of the things I learned in the Navy from like PR people was you don't have to answer the question that's asked. You can, and politicians are great. You can answer the question you want to answer. But I'm always upfront and honest about that. If someone asks me a question, I'm like, okay, that's not really the question I want to answer. And I'll say, can I answer this question instead? Can I answer it like this? And almost inevitably they go, yeah, of course. They don't have a problem. It's not like they're not married to the question. And if you say it that way, so let me give you an example. I had an officer once ask me, like, why do I go to church? What's the big deal? What do I get out of it? And I said, can I tell you why I have a relationship with God instead? And he said, yeah, sure, that's fine. That's kind of what I'm asking. And I'm like, yeah, I think it is. But I said, but here's why I want to answer that question. And I told him, to me, it's about relationships. First and foremost, about a relationship with God. Right? And I was able to answer that question. So I think that's one of the things we need to keep in mind as well is you don't have to be married to the question. Answer the question you want to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes, especially as we get practice with this, and we think about it more, like Lynn's example, we may see what they're trying to get at. They may not know how to phrase the question they're trying to ask. But as we get better at this, we may be able to say, okay, I see what they're getting at. And you can answer that question for them.
Zach, can I recommend, well, it's on my mind, I'm sorry, it's on topic, but it's not exactly. This, one way we can practice this is to talk with each other about spiritual things. Not the football game as much. I know we want to talk about, and yes, we can talk about those things, but like, if we're used to talking to each other, not just answering Zach's questions in class about spiritual things, whether it's sharing your testimony or like this thing I've really been thinking about and how I'm trying to apply scripture to it or understand it or whatever. Like if we have those conversations with each other, then we'll be used to talking about these things. If we're not even used to talking about them together, then we're gonna struggle to talk with people who aren't Christians about it or who or maybe you're, whatever, outside of the church. So
Absolutely.
I would strongly recommend that. Initiate that. Feel free to with me. If I'm on a surface level topic, you can just cut right to, I want to talk about something more important than that. Okay. Let's do it.
It does take practice. It's a little awkward sometimes to do that. Thank you, Scott. And as you're telling your story, if you've had questions or doubts, you don't have to hide it. You don't have to pretend like you've always known the right thing, right? It's okay to be upfront about struggles that you've had. Keep it quick, but be prepared to go deeper. We don't want to get into too much detail about, your family's history, going to church, or, sordid details from your past. Again, you want to keep it moving, but be prepared if they want to go deeper, you need to be prepared, right? Follow-up, any ideas for follow-up question for this?
Why are you not a Christian?
It's a good one.
Hopefully your answer was strong enough to make them think about why they're not.
Yeah, listen.
I mean, again, in our context, in South Carolina and America, it is unlikely you're going to just come across someone who has literally never heard about Christianity, who has no experience. I've asked questions about that, right? Because if they're not a Christian, the odds of them having had a negative experience with Christianity are pretty decent. And I think if we don't address that wound, right, we're not actually doing real ministry. We're not actually doing evangelism, right? And we run the risk of unintentionally reinforcing a negative belief that they've experienced about Christianity through their experience. So asking about their experience, right, I think is critical. I went to grad school with this girl. She's an international student, and we started talking about faith one day. We were on a train ride, and I was so excited. I thought, oh boy, I get to do this evangelism thing. Give me some words, God. And then she starts telling me about how this guy in our program, who is a Christian, had effectively been using taking her to church as a way to like coerce her into dating him, which is awful. And hearing about that, I realized, oh, like, nothing I say about theology or Jesus actually matters in this conversation because there's a wound there, right? Someone has used this thing that I care very much about to manipulate this person I care about, right? And so that kind of shifted my attention to what actually needed to happen in that conversation, which wasn't me talking about, hey, you need to believe the Bible, or hey, let's talk about, I don't know, the parables of Jesus. Because that's not what was important to her. That wasn't her experience. And I don't know how you mark these conversations as successful or as unsuccessful. But I think following up on whatever baggage they're bringing to the table, and maybe there is none, which, great, tabula rasa is kind of nice, but that's unlikely.
And a lot of times that experience though is indirect experience. Oh, I've heard this about Christianity. They may not have any personal experience, but they've heard this, they've seen this, I saw this on TikTok or whatever. And so you have to sometimes wade through the things that they've heard, and even though they have maybe zero direct experience.
Yeah. So figuring out what they believe, like Alyssa and Lynn said, have you ever studied Christianity? What do you think about Christianity? That sort of stuff. Good follow-up question. All right, last one. How do you know God is real? How do you know God is real? Again, it's like for all of these, it's helpful to know who you're talking to because people may be looking for different answers to this question, right? Some people, I think, are looking for a little bit more of some personal testimony, right? You can talk about the purpose that you found through Jesus. You can talk about prayers that have been answered, situations in your life where you've seen Him act. You can talk about that sort of stuff. Other people may be looking for more of a philosophical, apologetics, reason type of conversation. And those are fine to do with people who are interested in that sort of thing. But you just have to make sure you're comfortable with whatever you're going to talk about. And if you're not comfortable, don't talk about it. Because you can get in the weeds with this stuff. And if you're not comfortable talking about it, that's okay. Say, I have resources that I can point you towards. A lot of times these are going to be longer discussions, and you have to be comfortable with a little more pushback. Okay? So a lot of times when you're having these discussions, they're going to have what they believe, and they're going to share that with you. And it may not be what you believe. So you have to be comfortable with a little bit of give and take with these sorts of conversations. And then sometimes you can also talk about appeals to nature, the natural world. It kind of falls under apologetics a little bit. But you can talk about the beauty of the world, the design of the world, all that sort of stuff. In my opinion, personal testimony may be a little bit better if you're not comfortable with the apologetics stuff, because it's hard to debate somebody's experience, right? You can share your experience with them, and if you're not comfortable getting into the apologetics part, you don't have to. Alyssa?
Yeah, I think attempting to prove God is real to someone is going to be a really big task, and I don't know that that's one we're really called to, right? We're called to share the gospel, not to debate people, and I think sometimes we can fall into the trap of getting really defensive and saying stupid things, and making mistakes, getting kind of heated in that moment. But if our goal is not prove God is real, right, but share the good news of Jesus Christ, I think that can kind of take some of that pressure off of trying to do apologetics. Because it's better to not touch that, I would say, than to touch that poorly.
Yeah, ultimately, I think this conversation, it's something somebody is going to have to grapple with if they're going to become a Christian. If you're going to become a Christian, you have to believe in God, right? So they're going to have to grapple with this. But ultimately, I think you can maybe, like Lynn was saying, you can answer a different question and talk about your faith, right? Because really, God's not something that you prove, like Alyssa was saying. You can't prove God, but He's somebody that you believe, right? He's somebody you believe in. And so you can share that story of why I believe in God. And maybe that different framing might help the conversation a little bit more than getting into an apologetics debate. Dennis?
Define apologetics.
Apologetics is using reason, science to try to prove God. It's also, you could say it's the reasons why you believe. If somebody has a better definition, please jump in.
I think it's to answer the questions that the world has about faith. I think it's a defense is what it is. It's a defense of faith.
There you go. What, do you have a definition you want to
No,
share?
I just felt like there's a lot of people here probably don't know what apologetics are.
You're right, I should have defined my terms, you're right.
But Zach, I do agree, like, with what you're getting at on the, make sure you're comfortable, like, just, you really risk doing more damage than good if you start spouting off some non-scientific science facts and things like that, okay? And it is rare, I was first thinking 80-20, but it's probably 90-10 of like 90% of people are interested in your personal testimony, and that's what's going to be compelling to them. And if you even try to start throwing out, I'll just say, you know, bad science facts that you read somewhere, heard somewhere, that someone made up and started spreading because they thought it would be effective, you're damaging your personal testimony. So why even go there? So few people are making a faith decision on that, on those points. And I think it's I'm not saying it's unimportant, they're unimportant topics, but it is a relic of debates that no one is really having anymore in public very often. Yes, there are, you know, people like Richard Dawkins and people like that, you know, are out there like, it's just not what most people are thinking about, caring about. And if you start arguing about things that you're really not an expert on, you just really risk damaging the testimony, which is what could be really compelling to people. And we can agree, you know, I mean, Christians can have different opinions about certain scientific, you know, facts, backgrounds, or theories, I should say, you know, scientific theories and things like that. You know, so I'm just like double clicking on like, be cautious going down that road. That's not what most people are actually going to be convinced by or actually even thinking about, unless they're specifically asking you about that.
Yeah.
What do you think about dinosaurs?
Yeah.
What do you think about? I've had that question, right?
These
And
sorts
like,
of,
yeah, you know, so, okay, well, this person doesn't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
But I also, anyway, yeah.
these sorts of questions, I do think will come up, and they are something that, if you're going to become a Christian, you're going to have to grapple with some of these types of apologetic questions. But for our purposes of this conversation, you know, that may not be the time to get into it, right? Maybe the time to kind of reframe the question. Alyssa?
And just to underline and bold Scott's point, right? If you're not an expert in something, you can say, I am not an expert in this. That is totally fine, and I think that enhances your witness to say, I don't know everything, because it's not about us, right? It's about Jesus. Also, there are Christians who are experts in things, right? If you aren't a scientist, you don't need to play with that, right? There's so much misinformation out there. If you're not a historian, right, that is okay. There are Christian historians, right? And a lot of people publish and share things that are not in good faith, that are about faith. We don't need to touch that, right? Our job is not proving that God is real. It is sharing Jesus, it is sharing our testimony. That is what people are more invested in. And it is okay, if they are asking those specific questions, to go find an expert, right? Like, you have a community of people at your church, and what an opportunity too to invite that person and say, you know what, I don't know much about dinosaurs, but if you give me, I will find someone who does, and let's have coffee, you know? And you can extend the relationship in that way, in a way that is actually helpful.
Awesome, thank you. Easy follow-up question, why don't you believe in God, right? Again, just trying to find out more about them. All right, as we wrap up, I have something special for the last few minutes of class. So as part of our current strategic plan for Somerville Church of Christ, which you all have heard a lot about the past couple of months, adult education, our team, is really focused on improving the quality of our classes and improving the quality of the topics that we're selecting. So we want to make sure that the classes we're offering are relevant to you, that they're engaging, and that they're actually helping you with your walk of faith in your life, okay? We don't want our Bible classes to just be Bible trivia stuff. We want them to actually be improving your faith, helping you with your walk in your life. So to help us see where we're doing well, where we could be improving, we are going to start instituting kind of an end-of-quarter survey, end-of-quarter review, okay, for our classes. And I know this isn't quite the end of the quarter. I was supposed to have the last class of the quarter, but like I said at the beginning, I had to switch schedules around a little bit. So we're going to do it today, so I don't take time away from our speaker. But these are just a few short questions to help us understand what y'all are thinking. This is your chance to tell us what you like about the class, what you didn't like, what you thought about the teachers, what you thought about the topic, all that sort of stuff, okay? And please, I want you to be honest with us, okay? If you didn't like something, it's okay to tell us that you didn't like it, because we want to be offering you what is going to help you, okay? Normally, we will have a little section on here about the teachers, asking you how the teachers did, but for this class, since we had so many guest speakers, I didn't think that would be helpful. So all these questions are just about the class, okay? It's just a couple of questions, shouldn't take you more than a minute. You can hand them in to Sarah at the back there when you're finished. And as always, if there's ever anything you want to talk about with regards to our classes, ideas, if you want to get involved, just come talk to me, okay? All right, if there's no more questions about that, we'll be finished. Yes, sir.
This questionnaire is for the series of classes we've had, or just the class?
No, the whole series, the whole quarter of classes. All right, if there's no more questions, whenever you're finished, just hand it to Sarah on your way out, and we will see you in worship. Next week, we've got Gary Bone. He's going to be talking to us about service and how service